All right, if you would take your Bible, open it to the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs. I've had a couple of requests about, just general requests about the Bible and money, or the Bible and finances. Probably been 6-7 decades ago now, Brother Black wrote a number of workbooks for classes on giving, finances. Some of them were called, one was I think called My God and My Money. One was called Rust as a Witness. I think one was called A Little Contribution. But Brother V.P. Black was a great help to the brotherhood through the middle part of the 20th century and after. Preaching on the matter of stewardship and did the brotherhood a great service. We don't spend, as a general rule, a lot of time studying matters of finance, but the Bible has a lot to say about it. Normally we talk about our weekly contribution, the need for sacrificial, generous, liberal, sacrificial giving, but there are literally thousands of references in the Bible to money, or some, and what I mean, it could just even be in passing reference, like Judas sold Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. Money is found all throughout the Scriptures, and the Bible has somewhat to say, not only obviously about giving as a form of worship, but also giving or money, not giving, but money as a matter of stewardship and finance. And so we'll talk a little bit about those. I want to talk a little bit about those things tonight. And this, I think, hopefully will be of particular help to our younger families and or anybody who may, for example, struggle with putting together a budget and look at some of the things that the Bible has to say about these things. Now, just very quickly, I want to think about in a general way, what does the Bible say in a general way about money, and we'll talk about some of these in a little more detail going forward. But the Bible tells us not to trust in money or to trust in uncertain riches. 1 Timothy 6, 15 through 17, and we'll talk about that passage in a little bit. We could mention the rich but foolish farmer, and we'll probably reference him a little bit. In Luke 12, where I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger barns, and I'm going to take my ease because I've got a lot of goods laid up for many years. I'm just going to eat, drink, and be merry. And we know how that ended up for him with regard to the account that Jesus gave. The Bible tells us not to love money. Matthew chapter 6, 19 and following. 1 Timothy 6:10, that the love of money is the root of all. Money is not the root of all evil. All right, let's just make that clear. Money is not the love or the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. That's what the text teaches. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It says, which some, having coveted after, have erred from the faith. And so a lot of I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but how many times have you heard somebody say that money is the root of all evil? And that's not what the text says. It says the love of money. Look, money is a necessary commodity. There are very few societies that manage to function outside of some type of monetary system. And so, money is a necessity to function as a general rule in most or all societies. The Bible tells us to be content, which is also an attitude toward money. In Luke 3, when the soldiers came to John the Baptist, and they said, "What do we need to do?" And he said, "Be content with your wages and accuse no man falsely." Actually, he said, "Accuse no man falsely and be content with your wages." And the idea of accusing a man falsely was basically to blackmail him. That's the concept behind there. That I'm going to make an accusation against you. I'm a government official. I'm going to make an accusation against you. But if you pay me, I'll let this thing go. By the way, this happens all the time in a lot of third world countries because I have seen it. I mean, I was a part of that type of. I've been a part of that type of extortion on a number of occasions, both in Ghana and particularly in Liberia. But the matter of contentment is also a subject that pertains to our attitude toward money and finance. Now, I said we're going to look at the book of Proverbs. I want to note what Proverbs 30 and beginning in verse 8, where the writer makes the following statement. Proverbs 30, beginning in verse 8. Now, I'm going to throw you a curveball tonight because I'm reading. I've got an ESV with me tonight because I think that most of the passages that we'll read tonight, in my opinion, read better out of the ESV than they do the New King James. So Hunt, you're off the hook on having to read for me tonight, many times. So, and I thought about you when I pulled this Bible off the shelf. But in Proverbs 30, beginning in verse number 8, it says, "Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches, and feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God." And look at what is the writer, what does the writer here say? He says, if at all possible, I don't want to be rich, but I don't want to be poor, because there are pitfalls with being rich. And he says, and the primary pitfall with being rich is I forget about God. Now, if you want to I wish I should have made handouts of this for you, but in Deuteronomy 8, and beginning in verse 8 through 11, when God is bringing the children of Israel into the promised land, and which, by the way, we might say secular archaeologists, the secular sciences have shown that the conquest of Canaan was unlike any other conquest in the history of the world, insofar as that one nation displaced another nation or group of nations without destroying everything that they had. Remember, we talked this morning about the destruction of Jerusalem in Bible class. What happened to Jerusalem when Rome came in? Jesus predicted not one stone left on top of another. What happened when Babylon destroyed Jerusalem in 583 BC? Again, leveled it to the ground. And we know that in former conquests, that nations would just completely destroy other nations. Sennacherib destroyed 46 cities on his way to Jerusalem. 46 or 42 what were called walled cities. In other words, fortified cities. He laid them waste. But when the Israelites displaced the Canaanites, all their houses were still standing. All of their fields were still tilled. All of their vineyards were still in place. All of their wells were still dug. Instead of filling them up full of dirt and rocks or sowing salt in the fields like Grant did when they came in and destroyed the Confederacy in the Civil War, everything was still in its place. And God is warning the people, said, look, I'm bringing you into this land, and you're not even going to have to build a house. There's going to be an empty house somewhere waiting on you. And you're not going to have to remove the stumps and the rocks. In other words, the field's going to be ready for you to sow it and make a crop. The vineyards are there. The wells are dug. The orchards, everything is just ready. We might say it's move-in ready. Everything's right there. And he says, but you better be careful, lest when you have eaten and are full that you forget God. In other words, God is going to give you all these things, and then when you possess them, you're going to forget that God even gave them to you. And you might even go so far as to think that you got these things for yourself. That's almost unthinkable, right? And yet, how many times do we sometimes do the same thing? We think about the blessings that God has given us, and we may think that we're the source of our success, we're the source of our wealth, we're the source of our prosperity, when, as Deuteronomy 8 says, God gives you the power to get wealth. And so that's why the writer here says, I don't want to be rich because I don't want to forget God. Well, let me ask you something. Who is the richest man that ever lived? Solomon. Richest man that ever lived. Solomon made Israel to be so wealthy, the Bible said that silver was like a rock. In other words, if you saw a piece of silver lying on the ground, it wasn't even worth picking up. Yeah. Now look, I will tell you this. I'm to the point now, I don't pick up pennies on the ground. Now, I used to pick them all up, but look, if it's a nickel, I will bend over and pick up a nickel. All right? But the text teaches us that God, through Solomon, made Israel so rich that if a guy was to see say even a silver dollar lying on the ground, it wasn't even worth his time to bend over and pick it up. All right? So Solomon had unspeakable wealth. And what did Solomon do? He forgot about God. He married strange wives that the Bible had forbidden. He built altars and idols to gods who were not God. He bowed down with his wives and he served those gods. And the Bible says his wives turned away his heart from the Lord. But the only reason he had all those wives was because he had all that money. 700 wives and 300 concubines, as the Bible says. And so the wealthy are prone to forget God. And he says, but I don't want to be poor either, because if I'm poor and I'm hungry, I might steal something to get a bite to eat. And as a thief, I profane the God that I want to serve. And so the Bible here is teaching us contentment. I don't want to be rich. I don't want to be poor. It says, just give me what is needful. Just give me what is needful in that text. And so that's just a few general things that the Bible says about, in a general way, about money. Now I want to think about the power of contentment. The power of contentment. Hebrews 13 and verse 5 says, having food and clothing therewith, let us be content. Let us be content. Contentment is a natural guard against covetousness. Now, covetousness is a desire to have something that belongs to another, or an inordinate desire to have things. But contentment is a natural guard against covetousness. It reminds me about there was a man sitting on the beach, and it was about the middle of the day, and he was sitting there relaxing, and this visitor walks up and he says, what are you doing? He said, well, I got out early this morning and I went fishing and I caught all that I needed this morning, so now I'm relaxing on the beach. He said, man, what's wrong with you? He said, why didn't you just keep fishing and catch more fish? He said, why would I want to do that? He said, because if you catch more fish, then you can get more money. And if you get more money, you can hire help. And if you hire help, you can get more boats. And when you get more boats, you can get more fish. And pretty soon you can have a whole fleet. You can have a whole fleet of boats with workers and plenty of money. And the man said, and what would I do then? After I had all those things, he said, you could sit on the beach and relax. He said, what do you think I'm doing now? So that guy had it figured out. He had what he needed. By the way, and it wouldn't be anything wrong in the world if the man had worked and decided that was what he wanted. But it was the power of contentment. The power of contentment. That I've got what I need. In other words, the Lord's provided for me, and I'm going to enjoy life as God intended. And so, the power of contentment is a guard against covetousness. It's a manifestation of faith that God will provide, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as we move forward tonight, about the need for faith. So, the power of contentment. Paul said, I've learned in all things therewith to be content. I've been hungry and I've been full. I've had all that I needed and I have suffered need. He says, but everywhere, in all things, I have learned this, to be content. Whatever state I'm in, therewith to be content. And it's a great, and that is the context in which is found the statement, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It's in a context of the power of contentment. Now, I want to for lack of a better term, I want to get away from the biblical text just for a minute to lay a foundation with regard to the Bible and finances. But I want to talk about the negative side of finances and financial difficulties. Generally speaking, financial difficulties, and I would say the overwhelming amount of time, financial difficulties are not caused by a lack of income. They are caused by a lack of priorities. Not a lack of income, a lack of priorities. Now, let me give you an example, because my dad is a perfect example of this. My dad died in 1996. He was making about $2,000 a week. He had a cell phone in 96. He had his own cell phone, and the company paid his cell phone bill. The last bill that he had that Ron and I saw was over $500 for 1 month. For one of them cell phones that had the antenna that stuck out on it. It was the early days of cell phones. He was making about $100,000 a year. He had his cell phone paid for. He lived in a single wide trailer that he rented for $250 a month. He had 3 vehicles, a boat, and not a penny to his name. When my dad died, I had to buy his truck from the estate. Some of you may remember that red stepside I used to have back in the early 90s. I had to buy that truck from my dad's estate. And I said he had he had a Cadillac, a Lexus, a truck, and the truck, he had the truck so he could pull his boat. He had a Chris Craft, about 22-foot open bow mid-engine Chris Craft. I'm talking about a fine boat. But he died without a penny to his name and owed the government money. He had tax liabilities, didn't have life. Well, he had a little bit of life insurance that barely covered his burial costs. Yeah, it was a life insurance policy built into the health insurance that he had. It paid $5,000, and it was just enough to bury him. Other than that, didn't have a penny. The Lexus wasn't paid for, and he didn't even have credit life insurance on it. Back to the bank it went. The Cadillac was paid for, and it went to his girlfriend. She got the Cadillac, and I bought a truck from the estate. Now, my dad's money problems were not due to a lack of income. Look, I'd like to make $2,000 a week. In 2022, much less 1996. His problem was lack of priorities. Spend his money on gambling, spend his money on booze, spend his money on women, spend his money on his friends. My dad was one of those guys. If he had money, everybody in the bar had money. That's just the way that he was. But his problems were not a lack of income. His problems were a lack of priorities. And I've got to look. I could run through a litany of people in my family that ended up in that same boat. Their problem wasn't they didn't make enough money. Their problem was their priorities were all messed up. And so we want to make sure when we think about and this is where the Bible really speaks to these things about where our priorities are. But let me just give you an example of the world that we live in right now. For a number of years, our government ran a $1 trillion annual deficit. In other words, government revenues were about $3.5 trillion, and our government spent $4.5 trillion. In 2005, our national debt was $8.15 trillion. Today, it is $30.5 trillion. And the last 8 or 10 years, and the last 2 years in particular, where our government just lost its ever-loving mind in a knee-jerk and insane reaction to the COVID virus, and just blasted a hole right in our economy. They just started printing money like crazy. and started dumping money. And you want to know why we have inflation? Because our government's been printing money like crazy. Because our government paid people $800 a week to stay at home and not work. I mean, it was just insane. The government reaction to COVID and its response to COVID was insane, and it made zero financial sense. But it made people feel good until you have to pay the piper. And now we're having to pay the piper. And it's not going to be, listen, we're a long way from being out of this mess. A long way from being out of this mess. And so the government itself engaged in pathetic financial practices and economic practices. And now the super wealthy aren't paying the price, but we're all paying the price for this. Now, why would the government want to dump trillions of dollars into the economy? Well, they want people to feel good. They want people to think that they are taking care of them. They want people to feel like they can depend on the government to take care of their needs. Well, and so what has that gotten us? It's gotten us $30 trillion in debt. $30 trillion. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Now, the annual amount that our government pays in interest on the debt is $500 billion. That's the interest paid every year on the national debt. $500 billion in interest payment. Now, the total education budget added to the total transportation budget, in other words, your schools and your roads, the total annual budget is $150 billion. So we spend more than 3 times every year the amount just to pay the interest on our debt than we pay to fix our roads and educate our children. So you can see how these things can be a problem. How they can be a problem. Then you have such things, moving it to a more personal level. Just recently, our country for the first time hit $1 trillion in credit card debt. $1 trillion in credit card debt. Which means, and if you figure there's about 130 million households in the country, that means that every household in America, if you were to divide that number evenly, okay? If you divided that number evenly over every household would have $7,700 in credit card debt. And the average percentage rate on credit cards is between 14 and 19%. And if you make a late payment, they'll bust you at about 29%. I mean, it's just unbelievable the amount of interest that these companies charge for people to borrow the money. But every credit card holder owes on average, about $5,700. But look, and Walter and I used to talk about this all the time. If a household has 2 people that are credit card holders, they got about $10,500 in credit card debt on average. Which means somebody had Walter's $10,500 because he didn't have any credit card debt. And somebody got $10,500 on me because I don't have any credit card debt. But I have credit cards, but I don't have credit card debt. That means somebody else has got my $5,700. And so just imagine, every one of you that has a credit card and no credit card debt, somebody's got your $5,700. I mean, it's unreal. The amount of student loan debt is in excess of $1 trillion. In excess of $1 trillion in student loan debt. And it's just absolutely unreal what's going on with regard to personal finances and in regard to national finances. I mean, so think about what are some of the short-term and long-term effects of this massive amount of debt? Well, one is we're spending $500 billion a year just to pay interest on debt. What would $500 billion a year do for the education system and the roads? Man, you could just about pave them in gold, if you had that money. Think of all the homeless shelters that could be built. Think of all the drug treatment programs that could be built with $500 billion every year. Every year, not just to spend $500 billion on those things in 1 year, spend it on them in every year. So many difficulties could. Look, you're not going to solve the homeless problem. You're not going to solve the drug problem. You're not going to solve the welfare problem by throwing money at it. I'm just saying that people who really do need help and would take help, if they could get it, could be helped. What's the result in our homes? The number one cause of marital problem is money. Money. That's the number one problem of marital difficulties. Money. Number two is alcohol. Number two is alcohol. And number two may be the contributor to number one, if you just want to be honest about it. And so these types of things create tremendous amount of problems for us at a personal level. They create a tremendous amount of problems at the state and the national level. So that just kind of gives you an idea of where we are as a society and as a nation with regard to our finances. Now, in the book of Proverbs, I want us to look at what we're going to do is we're just going to walk through and read some of these texts. What the Bible has to say about Proverbs, or what the Proverbs have to say about money and finances. Open to the 6th proverb, Proverbs chapter 6. And we're going to read verses 6 through 11. And what we learn here with regard to money and finances is the need to work. The need to work. We've oftentimes said before God gave Adam a wife, he had a place to live and a job. That's a pretty good pattern. You're not ready to get married if you don't have a job and a place to live. All right? And by a place to live, I don't mean your mama's basement. I mean a place to live. All right, so God gave Adam a wife after He gave him a place to live and a job to do. And also I will add this before I get into the text. There are 3 things that everybody can do to avoid poverty, and Shapiro talks about this a lot. He says there's 3 things that everybody can do to avoid poverty. Number 1. If you do these 3 things, you're almost guaranteed not to live in poverty. Number 1, finish high school. Number 2, don't have kids until after you're married. Number 3, keep a 40-hour-a-week job. You do those 3 things and you'll stay out of poverty. He didn't say if you do those 3 things that you'll drive a Beamer, or live in a 4,000 square foot house on 50 acres. He said you'll have what you do those 3 things and you're all but guaranteed to stay out of poverty. Very simple things. All right, now in Proverbs 6 and beginning verse 6, here's what the wise man says: "Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer, gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want, that is need, like an armed man." He says the ant doesn't need somebody standing over it 24 hours a day telling it to work. It's one of the fables. I don't know if it's one of Aesop's fables or not, but there's the fable of the ant worked all summer while the grasshopper did what? Anybody remember? Fiddled. The ants worked all summer while the grasshopper fiddled, and then the frost came, and who didn't have anything to eat? The grasshopper. And who had plenty to eat? The ant. And so the Proverbs writer, isn't it interesting that over 1,000 years before Jesus was born, somebody's talking about the industriousness of the ant? Isn't that interesting? The ant prepares food in summer and gathers food in harvest. All right, Proverbs 14 and verse number 23. In all toil, that is labor, work, in all toil there is profit, but mere talk tends only to poverty. When Jeffrey was still in high school, let me lay the groundwork for this real quick. You know, when people see me and Philip out running and whatnot, they always say stuff like, "Man, I wish I could run," don't they? A lot of talk about people who wish they could run. And here's what we tell every person: every step counts. Walking or running. You may not be able to run, but you can probably walk. Every step counts. In other words, every little bit is something that is good. All right? Now, in this case, it says, in all labor there is good. Now, when Jeffrey was in high school, he and some of his friends and I went to Taco Bell. And we're getting a bite to eat, and one of his friends, other friends, had just started work at Taco Bell. Just started, hadn't been there a week or two, and I could tell by looking at him that he seemed like he was a little bit embarrassed that he was on that side of the counter, and they were on the other side of the counter. But he took their order and he gave them food, and when the boys went back and sat down, I went back up to the counter and I called him up and I said, "I'm going to tell you something." I said, "Never be ashamed of honest work. Never be ashamed of honest work." I said, it'll serve you all the days of your life. Now look, that kid ended up joining the military to help provide for himself and his family. But the point is, he understood work, and he understood the need to work, and he understood the value of work. And just like every step counts, every job counts. You know, if you're doing honest labor, you're doing a good thing. You may not be getting rich, but you're doing a good thing. You're doing what God wants you to do. All right, and by Proverbs 20 and verse number 13. Do not love sleep lest you come to poverty. Open your eyes and you will have plenty of bread. In other words, there's work to be done if a man just open his eyes. You think about all the guys that we know in our area who have small businesses, whether it might be a landscape business. What does he do for a living? He cuts grass for a living, but he makes a living. In other words, there's always something to be done by which we can provide for ourselves. It reminds me of a number of years ago. A friend of ours in Ghana, his name was Kwaku Narko. Kwaku just simply means he's born on Wednesday. Because everybody in Ghana has a name that designates the day of the week that they were born. So Kwaku Narko. And here's what he said. He said, all these people run around in Ghana acting like there's no money. And he said, there's money lying on the ground. There's money lying on the ground. What did he mean by that? He meant that the people, as a general rule, the people couldn't open their eyes to the possibilities. All they knew was the way that things always had been. For example, when you walk through the marketplace in Ghana, you walk through the market circle, you go to Accra, city of 6-7 million people, go to Takoradi, 1 million people, go through the villages. There's only about 5 or 10 different types of businesses. Somebody's got a beauty shop. And somebody's got a little booth where they're selling bottled water. And somebody's got a booth where they're selling can openers and plastic containers. Somebody's got a little booth and they're selling charcoal, homemade charcoal. In other words, everybody's doing the same thing. And so when the next guy comes along and he opens up a charcoal stand, what's he done? He's just diluted the charcoal market. He's not going to make any money, and he's causing the other people in the charcoal market not to make any money. You look at the implements that many of them use in their gardens and their farms, and they're so crude. Even the shape of their implements is all messed up. In other words, all they know is right angle. Every hoe, right angle. Well, guess what? Your hoe is not built on a right angle. You might think it is, but it's not. It's actually bent back this way, inside 90 degrees. And guess what? It makes it a whole lot easier to use when you do it like that. But they're all out there using 90-degree hoe angles. That's all they've ever known. My friend Mark Barker from down in Blackwater, Macedonia, went over there and was showing people how to make more effective implements for their farms and their gardens. But the point was, everybody's doing the same thing because that's all they know, and nobody's opened their eyes to the possibility of doing things different. But Kwaku Narko says there's money. He says there's money in Ghana lying on the ground. You just got to open your eyes and pick it up. And that's what the Proverbs writer here is saying. He says, open your eyes. Open your eyes. It's there to be had. I'm not talking about riches. I'm talking about the necessities of life. Open your eyes. It's there. It's there to be had. Proverbs 21 and verse 5. I'm gonna spend too much time here, but there's just so many great little texts here and things that I've lived and seen, and I'm sure that any of you could talk about the same examples. 21:5. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. In other words, people that fly by the seat of their pants rarely ever make it. They rarely ever make it. But people who make plans, in other words, lay out a foundation for success, and look at all the things that can happen that are good. Look at all the things that can happen that are bad. You think about a guy who might have some business, and he has no business plan, and he may even do good work. But if he's flying by the seat of his pants from one week to the next, he is not going to succeed. He's not going to succeed in the long run. And that's what the writer of Proverbs is saying here. It says, you plan and you work for the long haul. Don't be trying to scrap together something every 5 seconds. Prepare for the long haul. Proverbs 28:19, and then we'll move to a different topic. 28:19 and 20. Whoever walks in integrity will be delivered. He who is crooked in his ways will surely or suddenly fall. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. Pursues worthless pursuits. I know I mentioned this the other day when we talked about the lottery and the gambling issues that will be on the ballot this fall. That 20% of all millennials said that the lottery is their plan for retirement. 20% of all millennials said that the lottery is their retirement plan. They're going to hit the lottery and retire. Again, you have a greater chance, about 7 times greater chance of being struck by lightning than to win the lottery. And so you think about this idea of getting rich quick. By the way, why do most lottery winners end up bankrupt in a few short years? Because most lottery winners are poor, and poor people don't know how to handle money. They don't know how to handle money. They've never had money. They don't understand how money works. And that's why they're broke. That's why a lot of your NBA players are broke. I can't think of the guy's name right off the top of my head. Played for the Celtics. Man, his name just escaped me. But in any event, he played for the Boston Celtics, and during his career with the Celtics, he made $120 million. Antoine Walker, thank you, Scott. Antoine Walker made $120 million playing basketball, and then he was 38. He went to a minor league basketball league because he was broke. he was broke. He burned through $120 million in just a matter of a handful of years. What happened? He didn't understand how money works. You know, Shaquille O'Neal was reportedly said to have spent $1 million within 30 minutes of signing his first contract. He spent $1 million in the first 30 minutes of signing his contract. He bought a house, bought a six-figure car, bought his mom a six-figure car, and his dad said, "Where's mine?" And he bought his dad a six-figure car. And somebody got a hold of him and said, "Man, you can't keep this up." And he sat him down, and Shaquille O'Neal's made far more money in business than he ever made in basketball, and he probably made $200 million playing basketball. But somebody took him aside and showed him how money works. And man, he owns hundreds of car washes and pizza places. It's unbelievable what that guy owns. But somebody took him aside. But so many of these guys are broke because they don't know how money works. All right. Just very quickly, I'm not going to read all these because I want to get to a couple of things. The Proverbs tell us that money provides false confidence. False confidence. In Proverbs 11 and 28, Proverbs 18, 10 and 11 says that the rich man considers his wealth as a high tower or a high wall. In other words, he thinks he's built a hedge around himself with his money, and he doesn't realize that his confidence is ill-placed. You think about wealthy people who, they think their money is their protection. And they're wrong. First of all, it's no protection that you're ever going to live another day. That's Luke 12, right? The rich but foolish farmer. I'll tear down my barns, I'll build bigger barns, I'll take it easy and just live the high life. And what does God say to him? You're a fool. Tonight your soul's required of you. Then whose will these things be that you have provided? Because in other words, you can't take it with you. And his confidence was in his money. He considered it a hedge against all problems. Doesn't work that way. By the way, all right, Hunt, help me again. Who's the guy that built the Spruce Goose? Howard Hughes, thank you. Howard Hughes, one of the richest men that ever lived. But his money was no hedge for a good life. He was nuts. I mean, he was a germaphobe. You think some of our people are germaphobes? He wouldn't leave his house. Wore a mask all the time and gloves. Does that sound familiar? Wouldn't leave his house and just died. It looked like he'd been dead 20 years. But his money was no hedge for him, and he had enough money to burn a wet mule. And so money can create a false confidence or a false faith. Then the Bible talks about the danger of greed. The danger of greed and what greed does to us in Proverbs 1 verse 19. Proverbs 15. I'm reading these out loud, so if you want to go back and watch the video, or you can pick these up because I didn't give you a handout. Proverbs 15:27, Proverbs 23:4, Proverbs 28:22 talk about the dangers of greed. And then there's one more that I'd never read before. And it's Proverbs 17 verse 18. It says, a man who has no sense shakes the hand and gives a pledge for his neighbor. You know what he's really saying? A man that ain't got no sense cosigns a note for his neighbor. It says, shakes the hand and gives a pledge. That's a cosign. How many people got in trouble cosigning for folks that did not follow through on paying their debts? Now, and here's the thing. It says the man who has no sense does this. Now, why doesn't he have any sense? Because if he had any sense, he would know that he's co-signing for somebody who can't handle money, which is why they need a co-signer to begin with. Isn't that right? So a man who has no sense serves as a co-signer for his neighbor. Proverbs 17 and verse 18. If I didn't get anything else out of my study, I love to get in that verse right there. Proverbs 17, 18. All right, now, I want to talk for a moment about building a budget. All right? because it's never too late to build a budget. Man, Dave Ramsey has helped millions of families through building budgets. Some of them young families, some of them middle-aged, whatnot. And there's a lot of really good information out there, like Financial Peace. Is it Financial Peace University? He's got a book along those lines. Ramsey's got a number of really, really good books to help young families in particular build a budget, and also at the same time to build wealth. And when I mean wealth, I mean long-term security. But when we think about, for example, to think about building a budget, somebody just piped in and said, I wouldn't co-sign for my own kids. That's a good plan. Says, building a budget, all right? When you build your budget, you got to do two things. First of all, you got to figure out how much money you make, and then you also have to figure out how much money you're going to bring home. Have y'all seen some of those videos, those TikToks about teenagers getting their first paycheck? Yeah. Who is FICA? And why is FICA taking all my money? I mean, for real, these are real videos. Kids are getting their first paycheck and their mom and daddies are filming them on their phone. And they're looking at this check, and they worked 40 hours a week and they were making $10 an hour. So you know what they expected to see on that paycheck? $400. And then when it ended up being about $285, they're like, who is FICA? Who is withholding? Had no idea how much of their money the government was going to take right off the top. Look, just because you make $400 a week doesn't mean you need to budget on $400 a week or $1,000 a week. And look, and I know all of us that are of some age know these things, but some of you young people need to understand these things going into adulthood. Uncle Sam's going to get his cut, and it's a deep, deep cut. And if you work for yourself, it's going to be even deeper. Because if you work for somebody else, the government's going to cut about 7.5% of your check out for Social Security, and your boss is going to pay 7.5%. But if you work for yourself, guess who's responsible for the whole 15%? Which is why a lot of people don't understand why people that work for themselves charge the hourly rate that they do. Think about this. And John's not here, but I'll use him for an example anyway. Let's say John's down here and he's got his shop. And look, and I don't know what John charges an hour. I'm just going to say, I'm going to pull a number. I'm going to say $70 an hour. All right. The fee, and it may be more, it may be less. I don't know. But we'll just pull that $70 an hour out. All right. So John's charging $70 an hour for shop labor. And now somebody thinks, man, John's making $70 an hour, and if he works 40 hours a week, he's making $2,800 a week. That's $135,000 a year. That mechanic's making $135,000 a year. Oh, no, he's not. Because out of that $2,800, about $500 of that is going to the government right off the top. Plus the amount of money he had to spend on tools, the amount of money he had to spend on taxes, the amount of money he has to spend on all the things that he needs to run his business. Guys like that make probably less than half of what they charge.
And his insurance is probably...
Oh, his insurance, yeah. Who's paying John's health insurance? Who's paying John's retirement? All those things